I don't like driving at night anymore, and it's not because of bad eyesight or nerves. It's because of one stretch of road on the Blue Ridge Parkway that taught me how small you really are once the dark settles in. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes too, headlights hanging behind me like they were thinking. I was heading south just past midnight, late enough that the parkway had gone empty in that deep, unnatural way it does. No passing cars, no distant engines, just the low hum of my tires and the soft whine of wind slipping through the cracks in the doors. The radio was on, but turned low, a talk station out of Asheville that faded in and out between hills. Every time the signal dropped, the static felt too loud, like it was filling the car. I've driven that route plenty of times. I grew up not far from there, and those curves and overlooks were familiar in a way that made you careless. That night, though, everything felt tighter. The trees leaned in closer, their branches tangling overhead and blocking out the moon. Fog hung in pockets along the low spots, not thick enough to blind you, just enough to make the darkness feel layered. I first noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror about 20 minutes in. They were far back, rounding a curve I'd just come through. At first, I didn't think much of it. People drive late sometimes. Could have been another night worker or someone heading to one of the cabins off the parkway. The odd thing was how steady they were. Same distance, same brightness, no flicker as they hit bumps or dips in the road. They didn't gain on me, but they didn't fall back either. I sped up a little, pushing past the speed I was comfortable with on those curves. The headlights stayed right where they were, filling the center of my mirror. I slowed down, instead, letting my foot ease off the gas. Same result. They matched me perfectly, like they were tied to my bumper with an invisible rope. I told myself I was overthinking it. That's what you do when you've grown up around the woods. You learn to explain things away before fear has time to settle in. I turned the radio up a notch, trying to anchor myself to something normal. Then the static hit again, harder this time. The voices dissolved into noise, and I reached to adjust the dial. When I glanced back up, the headlights were closer. Not tailgating close, but close enough that I could see the faint halo of light spilling around them. Still no engine sound. On a road that is quiet, you usually hear a car before you see it. A low growl, tires whining on the pavement. There was nothing, just my own car and those lights. The road curved sharply to the right, and I slowed, gripping the wheel. The headlights followed the curve, smooth as anything, never drifting, never hesitating. Whoever was driving knew the road well, too well. That's when I decided to pull into the next overlook. Not because I wanted to stop, but because I wanted them gone. Let them pass, get ahead of me, prove to myself this was just another driver and not whatever my gut was whispering. The overlook came up quickly, a break in the trees with a low stone wall and a view you couldn't see at night anyway. I signaled early, eased off the road, and rolled to a stop near the far edge. I left the engine running. I didn't know why, but something in me didn't want to shut it off. The headlights slowed with me. They turned into the overlook and stopped directly behind my car, close enough that their beams lit up my back seat and painted long shadows across the dashboard. I waited for the sound of an engine idling. Nothing. No doors opened. No footsteps on gravel. I checked my mirrors. All I could see were the lights, perfectly level, glaring into the night. I cracked my window just a bit, listening hard. The woods were dead quiet. No crickets. No wind. Not even the distant rush of cars down in the valley. I sat there pretending to scroll through my phone, my thumb shaking enough that I could barely unlock the screen. I told myself they were probably checking their phone too. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were just being polite, waiting for me to pull back out first. A minute passed, then another. The lights didn't move. I glanced at my clock, 12:47 a.m. That's when the fear stopped being abstract and settled into my chest like weight. Because if someone is sitting in a car behind you for that long, doing nothing, not even shifting, something isn't right. I rolled my window back up and locked the doors, the click sounding way too loud in the stillness. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I thought about honking, about flashing my lights, about anything that might break the stalemate. But the idea of drawing attention felt wrong, like yelling in a church. Finally, I put the car back in drive. As soon as I eased forward, the headlights moved too. They followed me out of the overlook and back onto the parkway, closer now than they'd been before. I accelerated hard, faster than I should have on a road like that. The headlights surged forward, matching me instantly. My hands were slick on the wheel. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, afraid that if I looked too long in the mirror, I'd see something I couldn't explain. The curves came fast, one after another, and the car behind me hugged every one of them like it was on rails. I slowed suddenly, testing them. They slowed too. I sped up again. Same thing. I tried to convince myself it was some local messing with me, someone bored enough to tail a stranger for a few miles. But that didn't explain the silence, or the way the lights never wavered, never drifted, never reacted late. That's when I remembered the ranger station turnoff. It wasn't far, maybe another mile or two up the road. A small pull-off with a low building that was probably empty at that hour, but still lit. The thought of lights, of a building, of anything that meant other people was enough to give me a direction. I focused on the road, counting the reflective markers as they flashed by. 10, 20, 30. The sign for the ranger station appeared out of the darkness like a promise. I didn't slow. I didn't signal. I turned hard, tires crunching over gravel as I swung into the lot. For a split second, the headlights were right there behind me. Then they were gone. No slowing, no turning away. Just gone, like someone had flipped a switch. I slammed on the brakes and sat there, breathing hard, staring at the empty driveway behind me. I waited for the sound of tires on pavement, for an engine revving away into the night. There was nothing. I got out of the car despite every instinct screaming at me to stay inside. The air felt colder than it should have, heavy in my lungs. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the gravel. No tire tracks, none, just my own, cutting fresh lines through the dust. The building was dark, locked up tight. A sign on the door listed office hours that had ended long before I'd arrived. I stood there longer than I should have, listening, hoping I'd hear something, anything that would make sense of what just happened. The woods stayed silent. Eventually, I got back in my car and drove. I didn't stop again until I hit the outskirts of town, where the first gas station lights burned like a lighthouse. I pulled in and sat there shaking, hands locked around the steering wheel, feeling stupid and scared all at once. I didn't tell the clerk why I was there. I bought a bottle of water I didn't need and stood under the harsh fluorescent lights until my pulse slowed. I made it home just before dawn. The sky was starting to pale, the mountains softening into shapes instead of shadows. I sat in my driveway for a long time before going inside, listening to the quiet of a place that felt suddenly fragile. I told myself it was nothing. Fatigue, nerves, a coincidence layered on top of too much imagination. But a few weeks later, I mentioned it to a friend who used to work maintenance along the parkway. I kept it casual, laughed it off, described it like a weird thing that happened once. He didn't laugh. He asked me where it happened, what overlook, what mile marker. When I told him, he nodded slowly and said he'd heard similar stories before. Drivers followed without passing, cars that made no sound, lights that vanished when you pulled somewhere safe. Probably kids messing around, he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes, or someone trying to scare folks. I asked him if anyone had ever been caught. He shook his head. Nothing to catch. I don't drive that stretch at night anymore. If I have to be on the road after dark, I take the long way around, even if it costs me hours. Every now and then, though, I'll be driving somewhere quiet, and I'll see headlights in my mirror that seem a little too steady. When that happens, I pull over somewhere crowded, somewhere bright, and I don't wait to see if they pass. Because out there, once the road goes empty and the woods close in, you start to understand how easy it would be to disappear without a sound. I used to work second shift at a small manufacturing plant outside of town, the kind of place that still smelled like oil and old wood, no matter how many upgrades they made. By the time my shift ended, most nights it was close to midnight, and the drive Home took me through a long stretch of two-lane highway that cut through the hills, before reconnecting with the main road. I'd driven it so many times I could do it, without thinking, which is probably why that night caught me so off guard. It was late fall, cold enough that the fog stayed low and clung to the hollows. The sky was clear above the ridgelines, but down on the road, it felt like driving through breath. I had the heater running low and the radio on just loud enough to keep me company. The road was empty, no oncoming headlights, no taillights ahead of me. That wasn't unusual at that hour. Most folks around there were home by sundown. I was coming around a gentle curve when my headlights caught something pale on the shoulder. At first, I thought it was a deer standing wrong, maybe turned sideways. I eased off the gas. As I got closer, the shape resolved into a woman standing beside a mile marker, just past where the guardrail ended. She was facing the road, one arm raised, waving slowly. Not frantic, not urgent, just a steady, almost passionate motion. I remember noticing right away that she wasn't dressed for the cold. No jacket, no hat. She had on a light-colored sweater and dark pants, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders. It stirred just slightly in the breeze from my car as I slowed. There was no other car pulled off nearby, no hazard lights flashing, no sign she belonged there. Something about that should have made me drive on without stopping. Instead, I pulled over. I don't know why. Maybe it was how calm she looked, or how empty the road was. Maybe it was just habit, growing up in a place where you stop when someone needs help because someday that someone might be you. I rolled my window down a few inches. Cold air rushed in, carrying the damp smell of leaves and earth. "You okay?" I asked. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. "Need a ride or something?" She didn't answer. She smiled at me instead. It wasn't a friendly smile, not unfriendly either, just blank. Like she was copying something she'd seen before. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, unblinking, dark, and reflective in the headlights. After a moment, she lifted her arm again and pointed down the road, the same direction I was headed. Her finger was steady. Her hand didn't shake. I followed the line of her arm, glancing down the empty stretch of highway. "What's down there?" I asked. "Your car?" She didn't respond. She just kept smiling, arms still outstretched. That's when I noticed her breathing, or rather, the lack of it. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath puffing out in the beam of my headlights, but hers didn't show at all. A sudden, sharp fear hit me, like my body had made a decision without asking my brain. My stomach tightened. My skin prickled. Every instinct I had told me I was somewhere I shouldn't be, talking to someone I didn't understand. I rolled the window back up. The motor whined loud in the quiet. For a split second, I thought she might step closer, or bang on the glass, or say something, anything. She didn't move. "I'm sorry," I muttered, more to myself than to her, and put the car back in drive. As I pulled away, I checked my mirror. She was still standing there, arm raised, waving. Slowly, her smile fixed in place. The mile marker stood beside her, white and reflective. I remember the number clearly because it stuck in my head like a hook. Mile. Arshati. The road stretched on ahead of me, dark and empty. I told myself I'd call it in when I got home. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe she was waiting for someone and didn't realize how she looked. There were explanations if I wanted them badly enough. Still, I drove faster than usual. The further I got from that spot, the more the tension eased. My breathing slowed. The radio crackled back to life after dipping into static, and the familiar sound grounded me. I started to feel foolish, embarrassed by how quickly fear had taken over. About 10 minutes later, I rounded another curve, and my headlights caught the reflective strip of a mile marker. Mile 27. My first thought was that I'd misread it earlier. Mile markers can blur together at night, especially when you're rattled. I slowed without meaning to, my eyes scanning the shoulder. She stood there in the same place. Same sweater, same hair, same raised arm waving slowly, same mile marker at her side. Only this time, she wasn't smiling. Her mouth hung slightly open, lips parted just enough to show the darkness inside. Her eyes were still locked on the road, on me, unblinking. The look on her face wasn't angry or sad. It was expectant, like she was waiting for me to do something differently. My heart slammed against my ribs. My foot hovered between the brake and the gas. For a split second, a terrible thought crossed my mind that I'd turned around without realizing it, that I was back where I started. But I knew the road. I hadn't turned. I hadn't stopped. There was no loop, no way to come back to the same marker without changing direction. I didn't slow this time. I didn't look at her any longer than I had to. I kept my eyes forward and pressed the gas, my hands shaking on the wheel. In the mirror, she didn't wave. She just watched me go. I drove the rest of the way home on pure adrenaline. Every reflective sign made my chest tighten. Every shadow on the shoulder made me flinch. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my legs felt weak, like I'd run a mile without stopping. I sat in my car for a long time, engine idling, scanning the darkness around my house. When I finally went inside, I locked the door behind me and checked the windows. Even though I knew how ridiculous that was, I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, in daylight, everything felt smaller, less threatening. The memory of her face was already starting to blur around the edges, softened by the comfort of the sun and the ordinary sounds of morning. I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe there were two markers with the same number, placed wrong by a careless crew. Maybe she'd walked ahead faster than I thought. I went back that afternoon. I told myself it was to make sure she was okay, that if she really had been stranded, she might still need help. The truth was, I needed to see the place in daylight, to take the weight out of it. The road looked harmless under the sun. Trees were bare, leaves crunching underfoot as I pulled over near where I remembered stopping. Mile 27 stood there, white and clean. No sign of anyone having been around recently. No footprints, no tire tracks off the shoulder, just woods and road. I drove on, watching the markers tick by. Mile 28, mile 29, no sign of her. Relief washed over me, thin but welcome. I laughed at myself, shaking my head. Fear does strange things to your sense of direction. That night, at work, I mentioned it to one of the older guys during break. I kept it light, joking about seeing things when you're tired. He didn't laugh. He asked me which road, which marker. When I told him, he went quiet for a moment, chewing slowly. People see stuff out there, he said finally, especially at night. What kind of stuff? I asked. He shrugged. Lost folks. Folks that ain't all there. Best thing you can do is keep driving. I asked if anyone had ever reported someone standing by the road like that. He shook his head. Not officially. That should have been the end of it. I should have taken the advice and let it go. But the image of her not smiling the second time stuck with me, like a question I hadn't answered. A week later, I was driving home late again. I told myself I'd take a different route, but muscle memory carried me onto the same stretch of road before I realized what I was doing. By the time I thought to turn back, it felt too late, like giving in to fear would somehow make it worse. The night was colder than before. Frost edged the grass along the shoulder. The road was empty again, silent in that heavy way that presses in on you. I approached mile 27 with my jaw clenched, eyes darting. My pulse thudded in my ears. The shoulder was empty. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding and drove on, feeling foolish all over again. Maybe seeing her twice had been the trick of it, the thing that turned a strange moment into something my mind could twist. Then my headlights caught movement ahead. She stood farther down the road this time, just past mile 28. She wasn't waving. She was walking slowly along the shoulder, back to me, her steps unhurried. Her head was tilted slightly to one side, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. I slowed, my foot trembling on the brake. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to put distance between myself and whatever this was. But the road was narrow there, hemmed in by trees, and a steep drop on one side, no place to turn safely. As I rolled closer, she stopped walking. She turned her head, just enough that I could see the curve of her cheek in profile. She didn't look at me right away. She stood there, still, like she was letting me come to her. I couldn't. I veered slightly toward the center line, giving her as much space as I could without crossing fully into the other lane. As I passed, she turned to face me. Her eyes met mine through the glass. They were wet this time, shining, and she was crying without making a sound, tears tracking down her cheeks as she smiled that same empty smile. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I drove until the road widened and the lights of town came into view, until the fear dulled enough for me to breathe again. I never saw her again after that. But I don't take that road at night anymore. Sometimes, though, when I'm driving somewhere quiet and see a figure on the shoulder ahead, my chest tightens and my hands grip the wheel. Because I don't know who she was, or what she wanted, or why the road kept bringing me back to her. And I don't know what would have happened if I'd followed where she pointed. I was never the kind of person who put much stock in signs or gut feelings. I grew up in the foothills, learned early that fear wastes energy, and energy is something you don't have to spare when things go wrong. That night on the parkway, I told myself the same thing over and over. You're tired. You're driving too late. Rain makes everything feel worse than it is. If I'd listened harder to the quiet part of myself instead of the rational one, I might have turned around. It had started raining just after sunset, a steady Appalachian rain that didn't pound so much as soak. By the time I reached the higher elevations, it was coming down in sheets, fog, lifting off the pavement in low white curls. The parkway was nearly empty, which wasn't unusual for a weeknight, especially with weather like that. Most folks had the sense to stay home. I'd stayed late helping my brother patch a roof before the storm got worse, and now I was paying for it with a long, lonely drive. I rolled my window up tight and turned the radio on for company. The heater hummed, and the wipers worked a steady rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Trees crowded the road on both sides, their branches bending and creaking under the weight of water. Every now and then, a gust of wind would push the car just enough to make me adjust my grip on the wheel. The radio cut out without warning, not faded, not crackled, just gone. Every station I flipped to dissolved into the same flat, empty hiss. I tried AM, FM, stations I knew by heart, all static, the kind that feels thick, like it's filling the car. I glanced at my phone, mounted on the dash. No service, not even a flicker. That was unusual but not unheard of up there. The mountains have a way of swallowing signals whole. I sighed and settled in, telling myself I didn't need noise to make it home. I'd driven worse, roads in worse conditions. The parkway twisted ahead, reflective markers flashing by like slow blinks. Then a voice came through the static. It wasn't loud. It didn't crackle like you'd expect. It was calm, steady, and close, like someone sitting in the passenger seat speaking just above a whisper. "Ease off the gas," it said. "Sharp curve ahead." My foot lifted on instinct. A second later, the road bent hard to the right, tighter than it looked. In the rain, I felt a cold wash of relief as I guided the car through without sliding. I laughed under my breath, nerves spilling out as humor. "Okay," I said to no one. "Guess I needed that." I told myself it was some kind of bleed over, a Ranger transmission, a trucker on a CB line, crossing frequencies. Radios do strange things in the mountains, especially in bad weather. The static filled the space again. I drove on, shoulders slowly unclenching. A mile or so later, the voice came back. "Slow down," it said gently. "Deer cross here." I tapped the brakes, more irritated than scared now. "Yeah, I know," I muttered. That stretch was known for deer, especially after dark. Sure enough, two shapes burst from the trees. Moments later, hooves slipping on wet pavement as they bounded across the road. My heart kicked, but I was already slowing. I gripped the wheel tighter, eyes scanning the dark beyond the headlights. The voice didn't speak again right away, and I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. Coincidences happen, especially when you're primed to notice them. Rain hammered harder as I climbed. Fog thickened, blurring the edges of the world until everything beyond the road felt unreal. The wipers struggled to keep up, and I leaned forward, squinting into the glow of my headlights. "Watch the shoulder," the voice said, washed out. This time, I didn't slow. I was tired of being jerked around by my own nerves. I'm fine, I said, aloud, sharper than I meant to. I can see. The road dipped, and my tires hit standing water with a jolt that sent my stomach lurching. The car fishtailed just enough to get my attention before I corrected. My pulse roared in my ears. The static swallowed the voice again. I drove on in silence, jaw clenched, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. Part of me wanted the voice back. Part of me wanted it gone forever. The parkway straightened briefly, then curved again, climbing higher into the fog. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The world beyond my windshield was reduced to wet pavement and pale trees sliding past like ghosts. Curve tightens, the voice said. Brake now. I ignored it. I don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe. Pride. A need to prove to myself that I was still in control. I kept my speed steady, eyes fixed ahead. The curve came up faster than I expected. My headlights swung wide, catching something dark and wrong just off the road. A truck. It was wrapped around a tree at an impossible angle. The cab crushed in on itself, metal, peeled back like it had been torn open by hand. One headlight flickered weakly, casting uneven light across shattered glass and wet leaves. The smell hit me a second later. Oil, hot, metal, something burnt and sour underneath. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop, heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Rain drummed on the roof, steam rising from the wreck in ghostly plumes. I sat there for a moment, stunned, staring at the ruin just beyond my hood. If I'd hit that curve, at full speed, if I'd been a second slower, that could have been me. Hello, I called, voice shaking. I killed the engine and cracked the door, rain splashing my boots as I stepped out. The cold bit through my jacket immediately. The truck was old, an extended cab with mud-caked tires. No hazard lights, no movement. Inside. I approached carefully, slipping on wet leaves, my breath puffing white in the beam of my flashlight. The windshield was gone. The steering wheel bent inward. The driver's seat was empty. I shined the light around, calling out again. No answer, no footprints leading away, just rain, washing blood thin across the ground, disappearing into the dirt. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I backed away slowly, eyes scanning the trees. The woods pressed in close there, dark and dense, the kind of place sound goes to die. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that stepping too far from my car would be a mistake I couldn't take back. I climbed back inside and shut the door hard, locking it with a sharp click. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone again. Still no signal. The radio was silent now, not even static, just dead air. I waited for the voice. Part of me needed to hear it again, to confirm I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The seconds stretched, rain rattling the windows, my own breathing loud in the small space. Nothing. Eventually, I started the engine and pulled away, heart heavy with something like grief. I drove the rest of the way down the mountain at a crawl, flinching at every curve, every shadow. The voice never came back. I reported the wreck the next morning. The dispatcher thanked me and said they'd already received a call earlier in the night. I asked if they'd found the driver. There was a pause. No, she said. Truck was empty when we got there. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at my coffee going cold. The radio worked fine that morning, clear as a bell. My phone had full bars. The world felt solid again, like it always does in daylight. I told myself the voice had been stress, fatigue, some trick of the brain filling in gaps when I needed it to. But every explanation rang hollow when I replayed the sound of it in my head. Calm, certain, like it knew the road better than I ever could. A few weeks later, I ran into a park maintenance worker at a gas station near the parkway. We got to talking, and I mentioned the storm, the wreck I'd seen. He nodded slowly. That curve's bad, he said. Lost a few people there over the years. I hesitated, then asked, you ever hear about folks picking up transmissions up there? Voices on the radio? He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. Mountains do strange things, he said. Signals bounce. Old equipment still out there too. Stuff nobody bothered to remove. Equipment from what? I asked. Old ranger stations, he said. Emergency repeaters. Some of them ain't worked right in decades. I wanted to ask more, but he turned away, conversation clearly over. I don't drive the parkway in storms anymore. If rain starts to fall and I'm anywhere near it, I find another route, even if it takes twice as long. Sometimes, late at night, I'll be flipping through stations and hear a burst of static that makes my chest tighten. I always turn the radio off, because I don't know who or what was talking to me that night. I don't know if it was a warning meant for anyone who'd listen, or just for me. All I know is that someone knew what was ahead before I did. And somewhere up there, when the rain comes down hard and the fog rolls in thick, I can't help but wonder if that voice is still speaking into the static, waiting for the next tired driver to listen. Story 4. I've driven the Blue Ridge long enough to know when to turn around, but that night I didn't. I was tired, stubborn, and too familiar with the road to respect it the way I should have. Fog had been rolling in off the ridges all evening, thick bands of it settling low and then lifting again, like the mountains were breathing. By the time I hit the higher elevations, it stopped feeling natural and started feeling intentional, like the road was closing itself off behind me. I'd left later than planned after helping a friend board up an old family cabin before winter. The place sat deep in the trees, miles from the nearest town, and the work had taken longer than expected. By the time I locked up and started the drive back, it was well past midnight. I remember thinking I'd just push through and be home before 2. That was my first mistake. The fog came down fast. One minute I could see the reflectors along the guardrail, stretching ahead like a dotted line. The next they were swallowed whole. My headlights turned the fog into a solid wall of white, thick enough that depth stopped making sense. I slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel so tight my hands ached. The world shrank to 10 feet of pavement and nothing else. That's when I saw the brake lights. 2 dull red circles glowed ahead of me, hovering in the fog like embers. I felt an immediate rush of relief so strong it almost made me laugh. Another car, another person who knew this road, who could lead the way through whatever mess I'd driven into. I eased forward until I could make out the faint outline of a vehicle, dark-colored, maybe an SUV. The brake lights stayed on steady, not pulsing, not flickering, just there, waiting. I kept a careful distance, matching their speed. They crept along at maybe 20 miles an hour, slow enough to feel cautious, not panicked. Every curve came gentle and predictable, the car ahead guiding me through like a lantern. I focused on those red lights and let everything else fall away. The fog pressed in from all sides. I couldn't see trees or guardrails anymore, just the road directly under my tires and the glowing red ahead. Sound felt muted too, like the fog was swallowing it. Even the engine noise seemed dull, wrapped in cotton. We drove like that for a long time. At some point, I stopped thinking about where I was. I stopped checking the signs or watching for turnoffs. I trusted the car ahead completely, followed every slow brake, every slight drift to the left or right. When the road dipped, their lights dipped with it. When it curved, they curved. It felt strangely intimate, like we were connected by more than coincidence. I noticed after a while that they never used their turn signal. No blinkers, even when the road bent hard enough that I expected one out of habit. The brake lights never changed intensity either, just that steady red glow. I told myself it didn't matter. Plenty of people drive like that, especially late at night. The fog thickened until the lights ahead were the only color left in the world. Everything else was gray and white, featureless and close. My sense of time started to stretch. I couldn't tell if it had been 10 minutes or 30. The road felt endless, the same gentle curves repeating over and over. I remember feeling tired in a way that scared me. Not just sleepy, but heavy, like my thoughts were sinking. I shook my head, rolled my shoulders, turned the radio on low, just to have something else in the car with me. Static hissed back. No signal. I turned it off again. The brake lights ahead slowed suddenly. I reacted a second too late and had to tap my brakes harder than I liked. My heart jumped. For the first time, a flicker of irritation cut through the fog of my thoughts. I leaned forward, trying to see what had made them slow. Nothing, just more fog. They picked up speed again, easing back to that careful crawl. I followed, muttering, under my breath, adrenaline fading as quickly as it had come. A mile passed. Maybe more. That's when I realized something small but wrong. There were no oncoming headlights. I hadn't seen a single car pass us in the opposite direction since the fog closed in. No brief flare of white lights, no rush of wind as they went by. The parkway is quiet at night, but it's not that quiet. Even on bad nights, someone is usually out. There another late driver, a ranger, a trucker pushing through. I scanned the fog ahead of the brake lights, but it swallowed everything. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me either. Just my own headlights fading into white. We were alone. I tried to focus on the road signs, but I couldn't see them until I was right on top of them, and by then they were gone. I didn't know what mile marker I'd passed last. I couldn't remember the last overlook or pull-off. The road had stopped feeling like a place and started feeling like a tunnel. The brake lights ahead slowed again, this time almost to a stop. I braked harder, tires hissing on damp pavement. My pulse kicked up, sharp and fast. I leaned forward, straining to see. The car ahead sat there, motionless, brake lights glowing steadily. No hazard lights, no turn signal, just stopped in the middle of the road. "What are you doing?" I whispered, though my voice sounded strange in the quiet, too loud and too small at the same time. I waited a few seconds, then a few more. My foot hovered over the brake, calf burning. I considered honking but decided against it. Sound felt wrong out there, like it would carry too far. Just as I started to think about pulling around them, the brake lights dimmed slightly, and the car began moving again. Relief washed over me, thin but welcome. I followed. We drove on like that for what felt like forever. My neck ached from tension. My eyes burned from staring into red light and fog. I tried to think back through the drive, to anchor myself in memory, but everything before the fog felt far away, like it belonged to someone else. Then, without warning, the fog began to lift. It didn't vanish all at once. It thinned, loosening its grip in patches. The white wall ahead broke into drifting strands, and the trees started to reappear at the edges of my vision, dark and looming. As the world came back into focus, my eyes snapped to the car ahead. The brake lights were gone. There was no vehicle in front of me. I hit the brakes hard, my heart slamming against my ribs. The car skidded slightly before stopping, and for a moment I just sat there, stunned, staring at empty pavement. The road stretched straight ahead, clear and dry looking now that the fog had thinned. Trees lined both sides, evenly spaced. No turnoffs, no pull-offs, no place a car could have gone without me seeing it. I got out of the car before I could talk myself out of it. The air felt colder without the fog, sharper. I stood in the middle of the road, turning slowly, scanning for tire tracks, for any sign I hadn't imagined the last however many miles. There was nothing. No fresh tracks, no disturbed leaves, just my own faint tire marks where I'd braked. A deep, creeping unease settled into my chest, the kind that doesn't spike your heart rate, but makes everything feel slightly off, like the world has shifted half an inch to the side. I got back in the car and locked the doors, even though I knew how pointless that was. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, listening. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I drove on slowly, eyes darting, half expecting the brake lights to flare back into existence ahead of me. They didn't. The road stayed empty, stretching on and on. It wasn't until I reached the next marked intersection, one I knew well, that I realized how far I'd gone. I should have passed it long ago. By my rough estimate, I'd been following that car for miles beyond where the road should have turned or dropped in elevation. I pulled over at a lit gas station on the edge of town and sat there shaking, hands numb on the wheel. The clerk glanced at me like I looked half crazed, and maybe I did. I bought a bottle of water I didn't need just to have an excuse to stand under bright lights. I made it home not long after and slept poorly, dreams full of red lights drifting away into white nothing. In the morning, everything felt smaller, safer. The fog had burned off, leaving the Crom Mountains crisp and harmless looking. I told myself I'd been tired, that the fog had played tricks on my depth perception, that I'd followed someone who turned off somewhere I hadn't noticed. But the straight stretch of road bothered me. So did the lack of turnoffs. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back up in daylight, tracing the route as best I could. I wanted to find where that car could have disappeared, to give my mind something solid to hold on to. I never did. The road where the fog lifted was just as I remembered it, straight, narrow, hemmed in by trees, and a steep drop on one side. No hidden driveways, no service roads, no place to turn without leaving tracks. I mentioned it to an older man at the hardware store in town, someone who'd lived there his whole life. I kept it casual, laughing it off as a weird night drive. He listened quietly, then nodded once. "Fog'll do that," he said. "Make cars disappear?" I asked. He shrugged. "Make you follow things you shouldn't." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer, just went back to loading his truck. I don't drive that stretch of road at night anymore. If fog starts to roll in and I'm anywhere near it, I turn around. I don't care how long it takes to get home. Sometimes, though, late at night, when I'm driving somewhere else and a pair of brake lights appears ahead of me in the distance, my chest tightens. I hang back now. I don't follow close. I don't trust the road to tell me the truth when it's wrapped in fog. Because I know how easy it is to let relief override caution, how comforting it feels to believe you're not alone. And I know how quickly that comfort can vanish, leaving you on an empty road, wondering how long you've been following something that was never really there. I didn't plan on stopping at that overlook. I'd told myself I'd push through, get home, sleep in my own bed. But the road had been empty for so long that my eyes started to burn. That dull ache settling in behind them, that means you're not as sharp as you think you are. The Blue Ridge does that to you at night. The curves repeat just enough to lull you. The darkness presses in until everything feels the same. When I saw the small brown sign for the overlook, I took it without thinking. The pull-off was narrow, just a short strip of pavement widening from the road, bordered by a low stone wall on one side and trees on the other. No lights, no other cars. I rolled in slowly, eased the car into a spot facing the wall, and shut the engine off. The sudden quiet felt thick, like the world had leaned in close. The ticking of the cooling engine sounded louder than it should have. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, telling myself I'd count to 30 and then get moving again. I didn't make it to 10. There was a sharp knock on my driver's side window. Not a tap, not a hesitant rap, a firm, deliberate knock, like someone who expected to be answered. My eyes flew open. For a split second, I couldn't place where I was or why my chest felt like it was caving in. Then the darkness outside the glass snapped into focus, and I saw a shape standing just beyond my window. A man. He was close enough that his face filled most of the glass, lit faintly by the dim glow of my dashboard. He smiled when he saw me looking, teeth showing too clearly in the dark. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was stretched, practiced, like he'd learned it from watching other people do it. I didn't roll the window down. I didn't unlock the door. I just stared at him, my heart hammering hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. "Evenin'," he said, his voice muffled through the glass. He knocked again, lighter this time, almost polite. "Sorry to scare you. You got a minute?" I swallowed and shook my head. My mouth felt dry. "What do you need?" I asked, keeping my voice steady with effort. He leaned closer, pressing his palm flat against the glass, like he was trying to feel the warmth inside the car. "Just a ride," he said. "Just down the road. My truck broke down." I glanced past him, scanning the overlook. There was no other vehicle there. No hazard lights glowing in the trees. Just darkness and the faint outline of the stone wall. The woods beyond it dropped away into nothing I could see. "I can't," I said. "Car's full." It was an automatic lie, the kind you reach for when you need distance. The back seat was empty. He could see that. His eyes flicked past me for just a second, taking it in, then returned to my face without missing a beat. "That's all right," he said, still smiling. "I don't take up much room." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. He stood too close. People around there usually give you space, especially at night. He acted like the glass wasn't a barrier at all. "I'm sorry," I said again, firmer this time. "I can't help you." His smile didn't fade. If anything, it tightened, like a muscle being pulled too far. He leaned in closer, So close his breath fogged a small circle on the window. I caught a whiff of him, then dirt, sweat, something sour underneath, like clothes that hadn't been washed in a long time. "Come on," he said softly. "I know you're tired." That set something off in me. I hadn't said I was tired. I hadn't said anything about why I'd stopped. I shifted in my seat, my hand dropping to the door lock without thinking. Fingers brushing the cold plastic. "You need to step away from the car," I said. For a moment, he just watched me. His eyes were dark, reflecting nothing. The smile slipped, just a little, revealing something underneath that felt more honest and a lot less pleasant. Then he leaned even closer and lowered his voice until I could barely hear him. Through the glass. "My name," he whispered. My breath caught so hard it hurt. A cold wave washed through me, starting at my neck and spilling down my spine. He said it like he'd known me a long time, like he was reminding me of something. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't gotten out of the car. I hadn't left anything visible. That would explain it. I shook my head, panic rising fast. "You've got the wrong person," I said. "I don't know you." He tilted his head, studying me, the way you might look at an animal that's behaving, unexpectedly. "Sure you do," he said. "You just don't remember." My hand closed around the keys. The urge to start the car and get away slammed into me so hard it drowned out everything else. I twisted the ignition, the engine roaring to life loud enough to make him flinch back a step. His smile vanished completely then. I put the car in drive, tires crunching as I pulled away from the overlook. I didn't look back at him. I didn't check my mirrors until I'd merged back onto the road and put distance between us. When I finally glanced up, the overlook was already swallowed by darkness. I drove fast, faster than I should have, heart racing, eyes darting to the shoulders of the road. Every shadow looked like a person stepping out. Every reflective sign made me jump. I didn't stop again until I reached the lights of town. Even then, I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a long time, engine idling, scanning the lot. I told myself he'd just guessed my name, that maybe he'd overheard it somehow, maybe from a phone call earlier at the overlook I hadn't noticed. The explanations felt thin, but they were all I had. I didn't take that route again for a while. I went out of my way to avoid the parkway at night, even if it meant longer drives. Life went on, as it tends to, and the memory dulled around the edges. I told the story once or twice, always framing it like a strange encounter, something unsettling, but ultimately harmless. Then, about a month later, I saw him again. I was driving home earlier that time, just after sunset, the sky still holding onto a smear of orange over the ridges. I was on a different stretch of road, closer to town, when I noticed a man walking along the shoulder ahead of me. He had his thumb out. I slowed without thinking, then felt a jolt of recognition that sent my foot slamming back on the gas. Same build, same posture, same way of holding himself like he belonged wherever he stood. As I passed, he turned his head. It was him. No smile this time, just a flat, steady look that followed me as I went by. His eyes met mine through the windshield, and something passed between us that made my stomach drop. Not anger, not surprise. Recognition. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I drove until my hands ached from gripping the wheel. That night, I lay awake, listening to every sound my house made, convinced I'd hear a knock at the door. I kept seeing his face in my mind, that smile stretched too wide, the way he'd said my name like it belonged to him. I asked around the next day, casual-like. Mentioned a man asking for rides up on the parkway. Most folks shrugged it off. Drifters pass through all the time, people down on their luck. Nothing unusual. One older woman at the diner went quiet when I described him. "Where'd you see him?" she asked. I told her about the overlook. She shook her head slowly. "People don't stop there at night," she said. "Not if they know better." I asked her why. She hesitated, then leaned in closer. "They say folks go missing up there," she said. "Not a lot, just enough. Cars found empty, belongings left behind, no signs of a struggle." My chest tightened. "They think it's him?" I asked. She shook her head again. "No one knows who it is, or if it's one person. Just stories." I didn't press her. I didn't want to hear more. Weeks passed without incident. I started to relax again, letting routine smooth over the fear. Then one night, close to midnight, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I let it ring out, heart thudding, then tossed the phone onto the couch. A few seconds later, it buzzed with a voicemail notification. Against my better judgment, I played it. Static filled my ear at first, then a faint sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate, just. Before the message cut off, a voice whispered my name. I changed my number the next day. I haven't seen him again. Not clearly. Sometimes, though, when I'm driving at night and pull into a lit place to rest, I feel that same sense of being watched. Like someone is standing just out of sight, waiting for me to shut the engine off. I don't stop at overlooks anymore. If I'm tired, I keep driving until I reach somewhere crowded and bright. Somewhere with people who know my name because I've told them, not because they already knew it. Because out there, in the dark, I learned how thin the line is between a stranger, something that's been waiting for you longer than you realize. I was already on edge before the truck showed up. It had been a long day, the kind that leaves your body tired but your mind wired, and I'd stayed later than I should. Have at a friend's place up near the ridgeline. He'd bought an old house that sat just off a winding stretch of road, the kind locals warn you about, but still use because it's faster. By the time I said my goodbyes and pulled onto the highway, it was well past midnight, and the mountains had swallowed everything but the road. The night was clear but moonless. Trees crowded in on both sides, tall and dark, their branches knitting together overhead in places where the road dipped. My headlights felt small against it all, a narrow tunnel of yellow pushing through black. I kept my speed conservative, easing through the curves, listening to the tires hum against the pavement. No radio, no phone, just me and the road. I hadn't seen another car in miles when the headlights appeared behind me. They came up fast, cresting a hill and filling my rearview mirror with white light. I squinted, adjusting the mirror, my eyes already tired. The beams were high, glaring, straight into my face, and they stayed there, too close for comfort. I slowed a little, expecting them to back off or pass. The road was narrow, double, yellow lines winding through blind curves. But people still pass on it when they're impatient. The truck didn't. It crept closer instead, so close I couldn't see the headlights anymore, just a wall of light washing over the back of my car. My shadow stretched long and warped across the dashboard. I felt exposed, like I was being examined. "All right," I muttered, irritation prickling through my nerves. "I get it." I tapped my brakes lightly, not enough to slow, just enough to signal. No response. The truck stayed glued to me, matching every small change in speed. When I accelerated slightly, it surged forward too. When I eased off, it did the same. The road twisted tighter as we climbed. Sharp curves stacked on top of each other, the kind that force you to trust your memory more than your sight. Pulling over wasn't an option. There was no shoulder, just guardrail and drop-offs in places. Trees, pressed right up to the edge in others. The high beams never dipped. My eyes burned. I leaned forward trying to find some relief, but the light followed me. I flipped my mirror down to night mode, but it barely helped. The glare seeped around, the edges, caught in the corners of my vision. I tried to breathe through it, reminding myself that this was just another aggressive driver, someone local, who knew the road and didn't care who they scared. That explanation should have settled me. It didn't. There was something off about how steady the truck was. No drifting, no hesitation. It rode my bumper through every curve like it was tracing my path, tires humming in, perfect sync with mine. I couldn't hear the engine, couldn't hear anything over my own car, and the rush of blood in my ears. Minutes dragged by, 5, 10, longer. My shoulders ached from tension. Every curve felt sharper, every shadow deeper. I started counting turns in my head, trying to anchor myself, but the road blurred together. I flashed my hazard lights once, then again, hoping it might prompt them to pass or back off. Nothing changed. At one point, I slowed almost to a crawl on a particularly tight bend, my tires whispering against the pavement. The truck stayed right there, so close I thought for sure it would hit me. It didn't. It matched me perfectly, like it knew exactly how far it could push without making contact. Fear crept in slow and cold, threading its way through my frustration. My mind started offering darker explanations. What if they were drunk? What if they were trying to run me off the road? What if they didn't want me to pull over at all? I checked my phone. No signal. The idea of stopping crossed my mind anyway, pulling over wherever I could and letting whatever this was happen. The thought scared me enough to keep driving. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw lights ahead. A cluster of them, warm and yellow, breaking through the trees. Relief hit me so hard, it almost made me dizzy. I recognized the place as I got closer, an old inn that sat just off the road, one of the few spots along that stretch with consistent lighting. I'd passed it dozens of times but never stopped. I eased off the gas slightly, signaling my intention to slow. The truck stayed glued to me. As the road straightened near the inn, I felt my chest loosen just a bit. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the pavement, illuminating the area like a stage. I told myself the truck would pass now, embarrassed to have been so aggressive where people could see. It surged forward. The engine roared as it pulled into the left lane, blasting past me so close the side of my car shook. I flinched, gripping the wheel, heart slamming. I turned my head as it passed, adrenaline still high, ready to glare at the driver, to see the face of whoever had spent the last half hour riding my bumper. The driver's seat was empty. For a split second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The cab was lit clearly by the inn's lights as the truck sped by, windows clear, interior unobstructed. I saw the steering wheel, the dashboard, the headrest. No one behind the wheel, no hands, no silhouette, nothing. The truck didn't slow. It didn't swerve. It stayed perfectly centered in its lane as it blasted past and disappeared into the darkness beyond the inn, taillights shrinking. Fast. I coasted to a stop without realizing I was braking, my car rolling to a halt near the edge of the lit area. My heart hammered so hard it made me lightheaded. I stared down the road where the truck had gone, half expecting it to come back, to prove I'd imagined it. It didn't. The inn loomed beside me, quiet but alive, light spilling from windows, a sign humming softly. I put the car in park and sat there shaking, hands numb on the wheel. My reflection stared back at me from the windshield, pale and wide-eyed. After a minute, I forced myself out of the car. My legs felt weak, rubbery, but the solid ground under my feet helped. I walked a few steps, looking up and down the road, searching for any sign of the truck. Nothing. I went inside the inn, drawn by the sound of voices and the promise of other people. The lobby smelled like old wood and coffee. A man behind the desk looked up as I came in, eyebrows lifting at my expression. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded automatically, then shook my head. There was a truck. I started, then stopped. The words felt wrong, too thin for what I'd seen. "Did you see a truck just come through here?" He glanced toward the window. "Couple minutes ago?" "Yeah, flew by pretty fast." "Did you see the driver?" I asked. He frowned. "Didn't really look. Why?" As I swallowed. "Did it look empty?" He studied my face for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "You been driving long?" "Too long," I said. He gave a small, knowing nod. "Happens to the best of us. You want some water?" I took it, hands still trembling, and sat in one of the chairs by the window. I watched the road for a long time, but no truck came back. I stayed there until my breathing slowed and my heart stopped trying to climb out of my chest. When I finally left, I took the rest of the drive slow, scanning every shadow, every set of lights ahead. No one followed me. The road stayed empty. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the inside of that truck cab, clean and vacant, gliding past me like it didn't need anyone to guide it. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it. I replayed the moment over and over, looking for angles I'd missed. Maybe the lighting had been bad. Maybe the windows were tinted just right. Maybe the driver had leaned down at the exact wrong moment. Those explanations never sat right. A week later, I mentioned it to my friend, the one whose house I'd left that night. I told the story carefully, watching his face. When I described the empty driver's seat, his expression tightened. "You know, people say that stretch of road's bad," he said. "Bad how?" I asked. He shrugged. "Accidents. Folks riding too close. Cars found wrecked with no one around. My uncle swore he got tailgated up there once, same as you," said the truck. "Disappeared near the inn." I felt a chill slide down my spine. "Did he see a driver?" My friend hesitated, said he didn't want to talk about it. "I avoid that road now. I take the long way around, even if it adds an hour to my drive. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm on some other dark stretch of highway, I'll see headlights swell in my mirror, riding a little too close. When that happens, my chest tightens, and I look for the nearest place with lights. I don't try to outdrive them. I don't test them. I just want distance. Because I know how it feels to be hunted through the curves, to be watched by something that doesn't need eyes the way we do. And I know how easy it is, on those roads, for a driver to vanish, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and a story no one quite believes." I don't remember why I had the windows down that night. It had been a warm day, but the air up in the mountains cools fast after sunset, and by the time I reached that stretch of road, it was already chilly. I think I just wanted to feel something real, something outside the bubble of the car. I'd been alone most of the day, driving between job sites, and the silence inside the cab had started to feel heavy. The road I was on cut along the side of a ridge, narrow and winding, with steep woods dropping away on one side and a rock face rising on the other. No guardrail in places, just darkness and trees. It wasn't a road tourists usually took, mostly locals, log trucks during the day, and the occasional hunter heading home late. I'd driven it, enough to know its moods, when it felt safe and when it didn't. That night, it didn't. The moon was thin and low, barely enough to silver the tops of the trees. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel ahead of me, bugs splattering softly against the windshield. I had the radio off, enjoying the sound of tires on pavement and wind, rushing through the open windows. The woods smelled damp and green, that deep Appalachian smell of leaves and soil and old rot. That's when I heard the crying. At first, I thought it was the radio bleeding in somehow, a fragment of sound bounced off the mountains. It was faint, thin enough that I almost dismissed it as wind pushing through the trees. Then it came again, clearer this time, a sobbing sound, uneven and raw, rising up from the darkness below the road. I eased off the gas. The crying didn't sound like an animal. I'd heard foxes and coyotes before, heard the way their calls can twist your nerves if you're not used to them. This wasn't that. It had rhythm to it, breaks for breath, a hitch in the sound that caught in my chest like recognition. It sounded human. I slowed to a crawl, leaning forward, eyes scanning the trees to my right where the ground dropped away steeply. My headlights didn't reach far enough down to show much, just trunks and undergrowth fading into black. "Hey," I called out the window, my voice sounding small and stupid against the night. "You all right down there?" The crying continued, a little louder now, echoing up the slope. It carried oddly, bouncing between the trees in a way that made it hard to place exactly where it was. Coming from somewhere below me, close enough that my skin prickled. I rolled even slower, my foot hovering over the brake. Every instinct I had told me to, keep moving, but another part of me, the part raised to help when someone was hurt, wouldn't let me just drive away. As I crept forward, the sound shifted. It followed me, not like it was getting louder as I approached and quieter as I passed. It moved with me, staying just off to my right, matching my speed perfectly. When I slowed, the crying slowed. When I picked up just a little, it stretched out, the sobs coming faster, breathier. My stomach tightened. I stopped the car. The crying stopped too. The sudden silence felt heavier than the sound had. My ears rang, straining to catch anything: footsteps, branches snapping, a voice calling for help. Nothing, just the low hum of my engine and the faint rustle of leaves. I swallowed and glanced in my mirrors, then back toward the trees. "Hello?" I tried. Again, my voice steadier than I felt. "If you're hurt, I can call someone." No response. I told myself I'd imagined the way it moved with me. Sound does strange things in the mountains. It bends and carries in ways that don't make sense until you've lived there long enough to stop questioning it. That explanation should have been enough. Then I eased forward again. The crying started immediately, right alongside my car. It wasn't louder. It wasn't farther away. It was exactly where it had been before, as if whatever was making that sound was pacing me just out of sight, down the slope, where my headlights couldn't reach. My pulse kicked up hard. I glanced at the speedometer, 20 miles an hour. The crying matched it, the sobs stretching and compressing in time with my movement. I cracked the window a little more, leaning out just enough to hear better. The sound rushed in, clearer now, and I caught something underneath it that made my throat go dry. Breathing, not the hitching breath of someone sobbing, but steady, controlled breaths in between the cries, like whoever it was knew exactly how long to wail and when to stop. I straightened in my seat and rolled the window up part way, the glass sliding with a soft whine that felt too loud. My hands were slick on the wheel. "All right," I muttered to myself. "Enough." I pressed the gas gently, picking up speed. The crying stretched with it, keeping pace, never falling behind. The sound started to change then, losing some of its desperation. The sobs grew uneven, the pitch wavering in a way that made my skin crawl. I took the next curve too fast, tires humming as I corrected. The crying flowed through, it like it had practiced, echoing differently, but never breaking. Panic crept in slow and cold, settling in my chest. I thought about stopping again, about getting out of the car and shining my flashlight down the slope. The image that followed that of something down there waiting for me to step away from the road was enough to kill that idea. I glanced at my phone. No signal. The road ahead twisted deeper into the trees, a long stretch without any pull-offs or houses. I knew it well enough to know I wouldn't see another place to stop for miles. I sped up again. The crying sharpened, turning shriller, the sobs coming faster now. It felt closer, somehow, as if it were climbing the slope, even though I saw no movement among the trees. My chest tightened until each breath felt like work. "Stop," I said aloud, my voice shaking. I didn't know who I was talking to. "Just stop." The sound cut off abruptly. For half a second, relief washed through me so strong it made me dizzy. My shoulders sagged, tension draining away. I kept driving, eyes locked on the road, heart still, racing. Then the laughter started. It came from the same place the crying had, rising up from the woods below. Low at first, almost tentative, like someone testing the sound. Then it grew louder, fuller, echoing off the trees and the rock face across the road. It wasn't wild or manic, it was controlled, amused. The kind of laugh you make when something goes exactly the way you hoped it would. Every hair on my body stood up. I floored the gas. The engine roared, the car surging forward as the road blurred under my headlights. Curves flew at me faster than I could comfortably take them, but I didn't slow. The laughter rose with me, swelling in volume, pacing me the same way the crying had. It changed as I accelerated, breaking into short bursts, then stretching into long, breathy chuckles. I heard movement underneath it, now branches snapping, leaves sliding, something keeping up, somewhere down the slope where I couldn't see. I focused on the road with tunnel vision, muscles locked, breath coming fast and shallow. I didn't dare look to the side. I didn't want to give whatever it was. The satisfaction of knowing it had my full attention. The laughter grew louder as the road straightened briefly, carrying clearly through my open windows. I fumbled to roll them up, fingers clumsy with fear. The glass sealed with a dull thud, cutting the sound slightly but not enough. It still found its way in. I drove like that for what felt like forever, adrenaline screaming in my veins. Gradually, so gradually, I almost didn't notice the laughter began to lag. It fell behind by a fraction of a second, then another. It faded into the distance, echoing weakly as the road climbed higher and the slope dropped away differently. Then it was gone. I didn't slow down until I saw lights ahead, the warm glow of a small cluster of houses, near the edge of town. Only then did I ease off the gas, my legs shaking so badly I worried I might not be able to keep control of the pedals. I pulled into the first open place I saw, a gravel lot beside a closed store, and sat there with the engine running, hands locked around the steering wheel. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mouth dry and metallic. I stayed like that for a long time, listening. There was no crying, no laughter, just the distant hum of insects and the ticking of my cooling engine. Eventually, I drove the rest of the way home, every shadow along the road making me flinch. I parked in my driveway and sat there until the sky began to lighten, too wired to go inside. I didn't tell anyone right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. The story sounded thin, even to my own ears, like something that would earn polite smiles and raised eyebrows, sound carrying strangely, an animal I didn't recognize, fear filling in the gaps. Weeks passed. Life resumed its shape. The memory dulled at the edges, though it never fully left. Then one afternoon, I stopped by an old man's place to drop off some supplies. He lived alone in a cabin not far from that road, deeper in the woods. We sat on his porch for a bit, talking about nothing in particular. The conversation drifted, as it often does, to roads and weather and strange things you hear at night. Without thinking too much about it, I mentioned the crying. I kept it vague, just a sound I couldn't place, that followed my car for a while. I laughed it off as nerves. He didn't laugh. He stared out into the trees, jaw tight, and nodded slowly. "Best thing you did was keep driving," he said. I asked him what he meant. He took his time answering. "There's folks live out there," he said finally. "Not townsfolk, people that don't want to be found. You hear things sometimes, ain't always what they sound like." "People?" I asked. "Hurt people?" He shook his head once. "People that learned how to survive." I wanted to ask more, but he stood up then, conversation clearly over. "I don't drive with my windows down anymore, not on that road. If I have to take it at night, I keep the radio on low, something human to anchor me. I don't slow for sounds. I can't place. I don't call out. Sometimes, though, when the road is quiet and the woods press in close, I think I'd hear something just beyond the edge of the headlights. A faint sound, almost like someone trying to remember how to cry. When that happens, I grip the wheel and keep driving, because I know now how quickly crying can turn into laughter and how much worse it is when something enjoys being heard." I've driven that road so many times I could probably do it blind. It's the back way, home, the one locals use when they don't feel like dealing with traffic or tourists. 2 lanes that taper down to 1 in places, patched asphalt, old mailboxes leaning at odd angles. It winds through a stretch of woods most people barely notice anymore, because it's always been there, quiet and familiar. That night, it felt different the moment I turned onto it. It was late, well past dark, and I was tired in the deep way that makes everything feel slightly unreal. Not sleepy exactly, just worn thin. I'd stayed longer than I meant to, at my sister's place, helping her patch a leak in her roof, and by the time I left, the crickets were loud, and the air had that cool bite that settles in after a long Appalachian summer day. The turn was nothing special, a simple right, same as always. I didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. I remember thinking about how good it would feel to get home, kick my boots off, and sit in silence for a while. The road narrowed almost immediately. At first, I chalked it up to the darkness. Headlights have a way of playing tricks, flattening things out, making distances feel wrong. But as I drove on, the trees pressed closer, their branches reaching overhead, knitting together into a canopy that swallowed the sky. The familiar landmarks were gone. No old barn on the left, no sagging fence line, just woods, dense, unbroken woods. I slowed, my hands tightening on the wheel. "This isn't right," I muttered, more to hear my own voice than anything else. I glanced at my GPS. The screen froze, then spun, the little arrow turning in slow, confused circles. No signal bars. I tapped it once, then again, irritation creeping in. The road dipped, then climbed, twisting more sharply than I remembered. Gravel, crunched under my tires in places where there should have been pavement. I told myself I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere back there, maybe distracted, maybe tired enough not to notice. It happens. Roads look different at night. Memories blur. I kept going. After about 10 minutes, I saw the bridge. It rose out of the darkness like a pale scar across the road, stonework catching my headlights. Low walls, rough-cut blocks fitted together without mortar in places, moss clinging to the cracks. A creek ran beneath it, water glinting faintly as it slid over. Rocks. I slowed to a stop at the near end of the bridge, heart giving a small, uncomfortable kick. I knew that bridge. It was old, older than the road itself, and it sat maybe 5 minutes from my house on a completely different stretch. I'd crossed it countless times, always without thinking. Seeing it here, in the middle of unfamiliar woods, made no sense at all. I eased forward, tires thumping softly as they rolled onto stone. Halfway across, I looked down through the windshield, trying to catch a glimpse of the creek below, searching for some detail that might tell me this wasn't the same bridge. It looked exactly the same. Same bend in the stone, same dark stain near the center where water must have pooled at some point. Even the same old oak on the far side, its trunk split and twisted like a broken arm. When I reached the other end, I stopped again, my breath shallow. I could feel my pulse in my ears. "Okay," I said quietly, "okay." I turned around in the narrow space beyond the bridge, backing up carefully, then crossing it again in the opposite direction. The stone felt solid under my tires, real and undeniable. Once back on the other side, I took the first side road I saw, a narrow dirt path that cut off to the left. It wasn't marked, but it was there, and I didn't remember it being there before. That didn't matter. I just needed to get off whatever loop I'd stumbled into. The dirt road twisted and dipped, branches scraping lightly along the sides of my car. The woods felt closer here, heavier, like they were leaning in to listen. I drove slowly, scanning ahead, expecting to see a clearing or a house or anything that would anchor me back in reality. After 15 minutes, the dirt gave way to asphalt again, and there was the bridge. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. I stopped just short of it, headlights illuminating the same pale stone, the same moss, the same oak on the far side. I stared at it, waiting for something to change, for the illusion to break. It didn't. I shut the engine off. The sudden quiet pressed in on me. No wind, no insects, just the faint sound of water, moving below the bridge, steady and patient. I sat there with my hands in my lap, trying to think. Panic buzzed at the edges of my thoughts, but I forced it down. This had to have an explanation. Roads intersect. Bridges look alike. I could be disoriented, tired enough to be confusing one place for another. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I turned the car back on and crossed the bridge again, my jaw clenched. This time, I counted the seconds it took to get across. 8, exactly the same as it always took. On the far side, I drove straight, no turns, no side roads. I kept my eyes locked ahead, ignoring the way the woods seemed to close in tighter the farther I went. 20 minutes later, the bridge rose out of the darkness once more. I slammed the brakes, the car shuddering to a stop. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around it and started pulling. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I checked my phone again. Dead. I tried calling anyway, just to hear something. Nothing. I got out of the car. The night air felt thick, damp, carrying the smell of earth and old leaves. My headlights cast long, warped shadows across the stone bridge, making it look taller, more imposing. I walked a few steps toward it, my boots scuffing against gravel. Up close, the bridge felt wrong. Not in a supernatural way, just too present, too solid. The stone was cold under my fingers when I touched it, rough and real. This wasn't a trick of light or a dream. I listened. The creek below murmured softly, a constant sound that should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a countdown. I thought about walking across, about leaving the car behind and following the creek, until it led somewhere else. The idea flickered through my mind, tempting in its simplicity. Then I noticed something that made me freeze. There were footprints on the bridge. Not fresh, exactly, but visible in a thin layer of dirt and grit. Bare footprints. Long, narrow, toes splayed slightly, like someone who'd walked barefoot for a long time. They went from one side of the bridge to the other, then back again, over and over, overlapping until the pattern blurred. My throat went dry. I backed away slowly, every sense suddenly sharp. The woods felt different now, less like a backdrop and more like a presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not from any one direction, but from everywhere at once. I got back in the car and locked the doors. This time, when I crossed the bridge, I drove faster. On the other side, I took the first turn I saw, then the next, and the next after that. Left, right, left again. I stopped, trusting my instincts, and started acting on pure desperation. The road twisted and dipped, my headlights bouncing wildly. My heart pounded so hard it made my vision blur at the edges. I told myself I'd drive until I hit something, anything that wasn't trees and stone. When the bridge appeared again, I screamed. The sound tore out of me, raw and uncontrolled. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, tears burning my eyes. How? I gasped. How am I here again? I sat there, shaking, as the reality of it settled in. No matter what I did, no matter which way I turned, I ended up at that bridge. The same place, the same stone. Like the road itself was folded back on itself, trapping me in a loop I couldn't see the edges of. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt slippery, stretched thin. At some point, I noticed the woods weren't as quiet anymore. Something moved out there, not close enough to see, but close enough to hear. A soft rustle, then another. Footsteps, maybe, careful and slow. I held my breath, listening. A shape detached itself from the darkness near the far end of the bridge. Then, another, and another. They stayed just beyond the reach of my headlights, silhouettes against deeper shadow. I couldn't make out faces or clothes, just the suggestion of people standing where the road met the woods. They didn't move closer. They didn't need to. I understood then, in a way that sank deep into my bones, that this place wasn't meant for passing through. It was meant for circling, for wearing you down until you stopped trying to leave. I started the car with trembling hands and crossed the bridge again, my eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the shapes in my peripheral vision. On the other side, I drove without thinking, without choosing, letting the road take me wherever it wanted. When the bridge came into view again, something inside me broke. I pulled over and shut the engine off, the sudden silence ringing in my ears. I leaned forward until my forehead rested against the steering wheel and cried, quiet, helpless. I don't know how long I stayed like that, long enough for exhaustion to dull the sharpest edges of my fear, long enough for the night to feel endless. Eventually, I lifted my head and tried one last thing. I crossed the bridge slowly, deliberately, then stopped in the middle. I turned the car off and stepped out, standing on the stone, the creek whispering beneath me. I closed my eyes and took a shaky breath. I just want to go home, I said aloud. The words felt small, but they were all I had left. I got back in the car, turned around, and drove back the way I'd come, retracing my path exactly. Every turn, every curve. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I just followed the road. After a few minutes, the trees began to thin. The canopy opened, letting in a wash of starlight. A familiar bend appeared ahead, then a mailbox I recognized, leaning just the way it always had. I almost didn't believe it until I saw the glow of my town in the distance. I pulled into my driveway, shaking so badly I had trouble turning the engine off. I sat there for a long time before going inside, listening to the quiet, half expecting to hear water running or stone grinding against stone. I don't take that road anymore. Sometimes, when I drive past the turn late at night, I think about the bridge, about the way it waited for me, patient and inevitable. I wonder how many others have crossed it without realizing they weren't supposed to leave. And sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I swear I can hear water moving, where it shouldn't be steady and soft, like something counting the seconds until I make another wrong turn. I remember that night in the Blue Ridge Mountains like it's burned into my memory. I was heading home after visiting a friend who lived up in one of those little hollers you don't see on most maps, the kind of place that sits deep in the mountains and feels like it belongs to no one but the woods themselves. I left late, later than I should have, and the sun had long since disappeared behind the ridges. The air was damp, and the fog had started rolling in along the ridges, curling around the trees and spilling down into the valleys like some slow, silver tide. I'd been driving carefully, headlights cutting through the mist, listening to the tires hiss on the wet asphalt, when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just another car parked along the shoulder, maybe someone checking a map or taking a break. But then I noticed the uniform, a dark green jacket with reflective stripes and a badge glinting faintly in my headlights. The man was waving me down, standing tall and deliberate, like he had been expecting me. My pulse quickened. I didn't want trouble. I'd seen stories about mountain roads at night, about hikers or travelers who ran into trouble when they strayed. I slowed, rolled my window down, and he called out, "The road ahead is closed. You need to turn around. It's not safe." His voice was calm, professional, the kind that doesn't tolerate argument. I nodded quickly, thanked him, and turned the wheel. The tires hissed as I backed up, and then took the first junction I could see, heading back the way I'd come. I tried to shake the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just good luck that I'd been stopped before hitting some washed-out section or fallen tree. But the road twisted in ways that seemed longer than I remembered, tighter, like the mountains themselves were, pressing in. I told myself I'd just been tired, imagining things after a long evening. About 10 minutes later, fog clinging to the trees like cobwebs, I came around a curve and froze. There he was again, or at least where he had been. The same spot, same posture, standing rigid at the edge of the road. I hit the brakes instinctively, heart hammering in my chest. Only now, he wasn't there. No ranger, no movement, just fog, and the dark line of the road ahead. My headlights cut through the mist, illuminating nothing but trees and wet asphalt. I eased forward, telling myself it had been a trick of the light. Maybe the fog had shifted. Maybe a trick of my headlights casting shadows. My hands trembled on the wheel, and the hair on my arms stood on end. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see him in the distance, waving me back, warning me again. But there was nothing. Just the silence of the mountains at night, the distant call of an owl, the occasional scuff of a branch against the side of my car. I reached home eventually, but sleep did not come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing at the edge of the road, calm, professional, unyielding. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, tiredness, and the eerie isolation of the parkway feeding my imagination. I even mentioned it to my friend the next morning, but he just laughed, said maybe I'd had one too many cups of coffee. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I called the ranger station to ask about night shifts. I wanted to make sense of what I'd seen, to ground it in something real. The answer made my stomach turn. No one had been on duty that night. Not a single ranger in the entire park was working after hours. The station logs confirmed it. Every call, every patrol, everything accounted for. I drove the road again the following weekend, hoping for some rational explanation. Fog was lighter, the air crisp and clear, but the spot where I had seen him stood, empty. The road stretched in front of me, quiet and unbroken, as if it had never held anything but asphalt and trees. I took the turn carefully, watching for shadows, for any movement, but the mountains were indifferent, silent witnesses. Even now, months later, I can't explain what I saw. The memory sits in my chest like a stone I can't spit out. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles just right through the trees outside my window, I swear I hear footsteps on asphalt, slow and deliberate, keeping pace with me. And I wonder, was it ever a man in uniform? Or something else? Something that knew exactly when to appear, exactly when to vanish, leaving me questioning the very shape of the road and the mountains themselves? The memory lingers, sharper than any dream. Every time I think about driving back that way, I feel the weight of eyes on me, though no one is there. I remember that reflective glint of a badge, the calm authority in the voice, the impossible fact that I had never told him my name, never asked him anything, and yet I obeyed. I obeyed, because something deep in me recognized the authority, even if the reality of it made no sense. I don't take that road anymore, not after dark, not when the fog starts to creep along the ridges. Sometimes I drive past the intersection during the day, glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see a figure in uniform standing there, watching, waiting, but there's nothing. Just the forest, silent and unblinking, and the road stretching endlessly into the mountains. And every so often, I catch myself gripping the wheel a little tighter, wondering if the mountains remember, and if whatever I saw that night might still be out there, patient and deliberate, waiting for the next traveler to obey, without question. The thing about the Blue Ridge at night is that it feels alive, not in the sense of movement or sound, but in a quiet, creeping awareness that watches every turn, every mile. I've driven it hundreds of times, and nothing has ever felt quite the same since that night. The ranger who wasn't there haunts me not because he moved or spoke, but because he existed in that sliver of doubt between what I thought I knew and what I could no longer trust. I still don't know what I would have done if I hadn't turned around when I did. The thought chills me. Every so often, I dream of that road, of that shoulder in the fog, and I hear the soft, insistent voice, "Turn around, don't go further." But when I open my eyes, I'm in my bed, alone, heart still racing, listening for footsteps that aren't there, haunted by the memory of authority and absence wrapped into one impossible, unyielding presence. The mountains are patient, indifferent, and relentless. And the memory of that night, the ranger who was never on duty, never leaves. I remember that night with a clarity I can't shake, though I've tried countless times to convince myself it was nothing. I was driving home from my cousin's house, winding down the Blue Ridge Parkway, after a long day spent hiking and fixing fences and helping with chores up in the holler. The sun had set hours earlier, leaving behind a fading glow on the western ridges, and the world below was swallowed in a quiet, heavy darkness. It was one of those nights where even the crickets seemed muted, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. I'd been driving steadily, headlights cutting arcs through the twists of the road, tires gripping damp asphalt that still smelled faintly of rain from earlier in the day. The stretch I was on dipped sharply downhill for nearly 3 miles, a series of curves that demand attention even in daylight. I'd driven it hundreds of times and could almost do it blind. But that night, something felt off the moment I crested the first hill. I caught movement in the corner of my eye, just beyond the reach of my headlights. A flicker, a shadow that wasn't cast by the trees or the bends of the road. I shook my sick head and muttered to myself, blaming fatigue or leftover adrenaline from the day. Then I saw it again, and that's when I realized it wasn't imagination. Something was running beside my car. Not like an animal darting through the brush, it stayed in pace with me. Not faster, not slower, just, and there. I couldn't see clearly, just a vague outline, a blur that matched every rise and fall of my vehicle. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe a stray dog, but the sound was wrong. The breath, sharp, labored, almost human, echoed in a rhythm that perfectly matched my speed. Every step, every inhalation was synchronized with mine. My hands tightened on the wheel. My pulse hammered in my ears. I considered stopping, slowing down, but the thought made my skin crawl. What if whatever it was didn't want me to? I pressed the accelerator slightly, and it did the same. Leaning forward, I tried to catch a glimpse, to understand what I was seeing, but the fog of night and the curve of the road kept it just out of focus. There was no head, no eyes. Reflecting light, nothing familiar, just the movement, the pacing. It kept up with me, dogged and persistent, even as I hit 50 miles per hour on the straightaways. I thought about turning around, doubling back, but there's a stretch of road that curves tightly on both sides, cliff on one and drop to the creek on the other. There's nowhere to pull over safely. My mind raced. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a wild dog, maybe some feral person, maybe even a deer, but nothing I'd ever seen moved. Like that, breathed like that, mirrored me with such uncanny precision. Fear began to twist in my stomach, the primal kind that makes every hair stand on end and every sound sharper than it should be. I remember the moment I leaned slightly to glance in the passenger mirror. My own eyes met mine in the reflection for just a second, and then I thought I saw the outline. There, too tall, elongated, following my car with impossible coordination. I jerked my head back, telling myself I was hallucinating, tired, too much sun on the hike, maybe even the beer my cousin had offered me earlier, a half-forgotten indulgence. But the sounds didn't lie. The thump of heavy footsteps striking the shoulder, the rasp of breath mingling with the wind from the downhill rush, all perfectly timed to my movement. I didn't dare slow down. I didn't dare speed up. I just drove, gripping the wheel so hard I could feel the muscles in my forearms twitching. The road stretched long and dark, shadows bending in strange ways under the yellow glow of my headlights. At one point, I thought about switching on the high beams to see, but I hesitated. Something about that blur, that shape moving in the darkness, felt like it was meant to remain unseen. A sudden instinct told me that looking directly might provoke it, and I couldn't explain why, but I obeyed. Minutes or maybe hours. Time doesn't measure the same way when terror has its hands on you, passed in a tense silence, broken only by the sound of tires on wet asphalt and that ragged breathing beside me. Every turn, every twist of the road, it followed, just beyond the reach of light. My mind filled with questions I didn't want answers to. Could it climb like a person? Could it leap across the road if I slowed? I couldn't see, but my gut knew it could. I couldn't stop, because stopping meant leaving myself exposed. Then, just when the uphill slope of the mountains ahead began to flatten, I saw the glow of town lights. My chest rose and fell rapidly, hope and panic warring for control. The outline beside me slowed too, as if considering my approach. I floored the accelerator for the last stretch, heart hammering so violently I was sure it would burst through my chest. And then, just like that, it was gone. I slammed the brakes instinctively, throwing the car into a stop at the edge of the road. My headlights swept over the shoulder, the tree line, the small ditch that ran alongside the asphalt. Nothing. No shape, no blur, nothing but wet leaves and the darkness of the trees. I sat there, hands trembling, listening to my own ragged breathing, trying to convince myself it had simply turned away or run back into the woods. The next morning, I drove the same stretch in daylight. Every bend, every dip, every curve that had seemed menacing and alive at night now looked ordinary, banal even. I parked along the shoulder where I'd last seen it, walked carefully through the trees, and found deep, wide footprints pressed into the shoulder. They were too long and narrow to be any animal I recognized, and they were spaced in a rhythm that suggested something had been moving in perfect coordination with my car. I traced them as far as I could, but the trees closed in, the slope dropped, and they vanished, abruptly, swallowed by the earth, as though they had never existed. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a local prankster, some hunter who knew the road and wanted to scare late-night drivers. But that doesn't explain the breathing, the way it kept pace, the impossibility of seeing anything concrete. I've told friends, family, even strangers on forums, but everyone dismisses it as fatigue, imagination, or exaggeration. But I know what I experienced. I know how the terror gripped me, how every instinct in my body screamed that something intelligent, something aware, had been beside me, moving with me, watching me. I haven't driven that stretch of road at night since. I avoid it whenever I can, even when it adds miles to my commute. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the echo of footsteps in my dreams, a rhythm that mirrors my own, growing louder as I try to move faster. And when I wake, I find myself checking the shoulder along that stretch of road, half expecting to see that blur in the distance, pacing beside me, patient and relentless. It left tracks, yes, but no closure. No sign of what it was, no explanation, just a memory that follows me as closely as it followed me that night. A memory that makes me grip the wheel tighter and hold my breath whenever I think about going back. Even now, months later, I can feel it beside me when the wind shifts through the trees, when headlights cut arcs across dark shoulders, when the road bends and drops in that familiar way. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to. I only know it exists in that space just beyond what we see, moving with us, waiting, pacing patiently, and that knowledge is enough to keep me awake for hours, staring at the headlights of passing cars and imagining it running there, just out of reach.